Okay, so we're starting here for the second time because I guess there was some internet issues. Um, this title of this presentation is the Neurology um, and Scientific Evidence Behind Supported Typing. To give you a little more information about me, I've been a practicing physical therapist for over, well, I guess it's right around 40 years. Um, and um, my son, who was born in 1988, was diagnosed with a seizure disorder, but also what would now be described as level 3 autism, in that he had pretty severe self-regulation issues and had trouble speaking words out of his mouth. Not long before my son died, he typed with me um, using what people would now describe as facilitated communication training. And that one instance really impacted me in terms of wanting to try and understand the motor system in autism and what was happening, and also wanted to try and explain the controversy around supported typing because I feel like it's a hugely important technique that can help a lot of kids. And while there was evidence early on in studies that there could be influence, whereas some people have said that that's all there is there. Um, I felt the movement with my son, and there's no way he would have sat down for a 20-minute test or been able to um, well, anyways, I don't think he would have been able to sit through a test that were the tests that were done. And so, kind of in short, there's a why there was so much evidence for influence is that I think the people who participated in those studies were um, maybe had institutionalization syndrome, but also there's a neurologic phenomenon called thigmotaxis that causes for influence. So let's back up a little bit. So I told you about my son Chris and that I am his parent, of course. Um, Here, let me see how I do this. Um, to move slides. Okay. So just as a physical therapist, after Chris passed away, I started a therapy program that looks at the motor differences, well, the sensory motor differences, um, and tries to address those to explain a lot of what we see rather than some of the terms that, and we feel like it's much better, kids are much better served if we use methods that are trying to understand the neurologic system and what's going on. That, like, everything we see in autism isn't an avoidance or an escape or a non-compliance type behavior. There's a reason why they do what they do. And once you start understanding those reasons, you can really help them. But really, what this is about is we want to understand a brief timeline of supported typing and understand some of the differences in autism in terms of brain connectivity that underlie the ability to use the written word. Now, some of the basic questions that have come up in supported typing are how could someone learn to read without being formally taught? And why would someone need to support to access the keyboard? Why couldn't somebody who can walk just walk over to the keyboard, pick it up, and start typing? Um, so in terms of the history of supported typing, it was started in the late 80s by a woman named Rosemary Crossley, who's actually working with a young woman with cerebral palsy. And then she used these methods with other children with autism and found that they were effective. In the early 90s, there was several studies or a few studies that looked at influence. I mean, that tried to assess who was doing the typing. And a lot of that was based on that there were some accusations um, of abuse that came out. So that just kind of added a little fuel to the fire in terms of trying to understand. And I think because of these studies showed influence, there was a huge backlash. And so, like the American Speech and Hearing Association, several people who are involved in speech therapy and autism work have kind of banded together to I guess, well, the way I would put it was to bash supported typing or to prevent, I think in their eyes, it's to prevent something that they feel is harmful for kids. I don't feel that way, but they do. Um, and that's why I ended up going back to school to try and learn as much as I can about the brain connectivity and eventually got my PhD, which is a lot of what I'm presenting here, what I learned during that program. So with Chris, when we took him to a therapy program, which is, mine is modeled after. Um, and there was a speech therapist who had worked with somebody who's pretty independent. Anyways, Chris wouldn't type with us at camp, which is fairly common. Um, when you start introducing this with kids, I think my guess is they've got a routine of how they communicate with their parents, and it just makes it more difficult to break out of those routines. But with Chris, he'd been crying for a long time. Well, this is the abbreviated version. He'd been crying for a long time, and I got all of the favorite things that I could think of. He loved taking a bath. He loved, there was a certain lullaby tape or a Joni Mitchell. He loved to listen to Joni Mitchell. So I kept trying all these things and he just kept screaming louder and louder. And so I'd finally, this is right after we'd gone to the camp and the speech therapist had given us this letterboard. So probably after 10 minutes, I finally got out this letterboard and sat him in front of me and he totally quieted down. And then what the therapist showed me was to kind of push against his hand. So it's not like hand over hand, you're actually resisting the movement. And he very clearly with me typed Raffi. And the amount of like pushing against me was probably like 2 to 3 pounds, I guess, pressure. Um, and so anyways, we were visiting with Chris's dad's mom at the time after camp, and she had two VCRs. And it turns out Chris had been watching Raffi, a video he liked, and his younger sister wanted to watch Old MacDonald. And so Chris was doing his, thing playing with a toy, and his dad didn't think that he was paying attention, so he switched tapes. Um, so anyways, it's like good old sibling rivalry. And it's not like Chris, all of a sudden started typing War and Peace, but he was diagnosed. He was by, I don't know if you call it diagnosed, but at least two doctors had called him severely and profoundly retarded. Now, recently, there's been a resurgence. I think it's partially because of social media. There's a new method called the Speller's method, which actually is a twist on the rapid prompting method. Um, and and we'll kind of touch base on some of the neurologic reasons. So many continue to believe that the only thing that is what is happening in terms of what is being typed is that what the person supporting the person with autism intends. Yet several individuals have gone on to be independent and even attend college. And individual stories continue to be represented in the news. So this is
like me to use this word in a sentence.
Yeah.
This is a young man. We won't watch this whole thing, but if you want to Google him, his name is Grant Blashko, and this video is on a site called United for Communication Choice, I believe. and they have a lot of free resources. And this is a video, but this is Grant and his mom, and Grant is working. I think they were wanting to show like getting started steps. And I'll just play a little bit of it so you can see how he types.
Congratulations. Mom, space. A. No.
So you can see how he types. He would in this video, he goes on to say that I know you think this is a good idea, but it is not. And then mom says, well, what would you like to say? And then he goes on to say something like, here, we'll go to the end and I'll let you hear it. And I'm not playing this because I'm worried you're gonna pick up on subtle cues. If there's any detractors watching this, I have a limited time.
B. D. D. A. B. Yes. M. E. S. There are the people insinuating that I wear a puppet string because this is hard enough without people rooting against me.
Okay, so why don't we talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so I don't know if you could hear all that, but it was like, I'm tired of people looking at me as if I'm attached to a puppet string. This is hard enough as it is. The idea behind the typing is that there's a dyspraxia and a cognitive motor difference, or I hate the word disorder and all that cruddy stuff, but their brain is connected differently, so they have trouble controlling motor skills they're thinking about. So even though they can walk, that's a reflex. Even though they might be able to learn something through repetition, their ability to like imitate a new skill, to control their movement once they do it. An easy thing to look at is if for kids who may jump regularly, try them controlling and only jumping 10 times. Now, oftentimes that's thought that that's a cognitive issue. They're not understanding, but it can also mean that their body can't, doesn't know how to control that stopping, starting. We can see that in a lot of different ways, but we won't get into that today. We're kind of limited. So this is just a story I'll show you real quick. It was on Sunday morning, sometime in the last year-ish. It's about a young man who types, and I just put it in here to show that it's like it's in that the supported typing stuff. It's in the media. It's online. And yet I believe that a lot of people don't understand it and when they do go to a lot of professionals have been told that this is not evidence-based, or that it's a bunch of malarkey, I guess is really as Biden.
Over the years, we've profiled.
All right, so we already talked about this. Most of the country centers around the initial technique that initially focused on using physical support. And just a brief thing, I believe all of these methods contribute a different amount. They take advantage of brain connections. So facilitated communication uses that resistance. So you're amplifying that movement. Rapid prompting and the speller's method work on using a tool or handing something to someone to activate muscles. And also there's evidence, and it's kind of a funky thing, that when you attach movement to an object, it can support doing that movement. And then there's like different ways you can use rhythm to support the motor system. And of course, this is not, a training for doing it. This is more of just presenting it. Okay, so let's get on to why would someone need physical support? Um, so I use this quote all the time. There's a young autistic man. Actually, I'm not sure how Shami might be up to middle age by now. And he types to communicate. Shami lives in Sri Lanka, last time I knew, and he and his mom have a school. And Shami says this was from a Times Magazine article from I think 2006. Anyways, he says, I don't feel my hand unless I feel your hand on my hand. I don't feel my feet unless I'm stomping them. So why would that make sense? Why would he not have a strong sense of that? Well, therapists are taught to test for the body awareness sense, where your body is in space. If you close your eyes and move your hand in a certain direction, then you can visually see in your mind's eye where your hand is, even though you're not looking at it. That comes from that body awareness sense, which we call proprioception. Those of you who work with therapists have probably heard that a fair amount. There is evidence that those body maps are not well mapped out in kids with autism. So therefore, however, there are these short connections that are overly connected in autism, and these connect each adjacent area of the brain, so it kind of goes around in a circle. And the ones that have been studied are connect the main sensory area to the main motor area. So these loops would go all around the brain, connecting each adjacent area. And this is where the main motor area is, and this is where the main sensory area is. So if you think the body maps in the other higher level motor sense aren't really working, and it's worse, if you have worse autism or, a higher level autism, um, then, but these connections, down here are overconnected. So you have to think, so if you have good body awareness and there's good connections from the higher level motor area to the main motor area, that's how a typically connected brain works to start, stop, sustain movements. We cognitively control that. There's evidence that these connections from the higher level motor areas aren't connected well to that main motor area. And these U loops, so every time we move, are connected, and they connect in to the front of the brain. So it makes sense for Shami to say, I don't feel my hand unless I feel your hand on my hand. I don't feel my feet unless I'm stomping them. All right, let's see. So top-down control requires efficient connectivity to and within the front or action part of the brain. So that top-down control is, okay, say you're in a long meeting and you have to go to the restroom. You would you might look at the clock and say, oh, we'll have a break in 5 minutes. I can wait. You can have that thought. We don't think about that, but that requires good neural connections in the front part of your brain. And so, if someone with autism has that urge, they don't have that good connectivity to be able to control that movement. They might just hop up to go to the bathroom. This in general is called we refer to this sometimes as executive function. Okay. So also just to think, the motor system, this is the area most affected in autism. And we'll look, there's two, I'm just going to show you while we're on this slide. There's two main visual areas. This bottom one is well connected, and this top one connects to here, but then it doesn't it doesn't connect well into the frontal lobe. And there'll be another slide, but while we're on this, so this bottom stream that I said is well connected, processes pictures, objects, but also whole words and their meanings. All right, let's see here. I don't know why this isn't moving forward. All right, maybe I didn't download the whole slides. So let's answer the two questions. So why would someone need physical support? If we don't have that good connectivity from the higher level motor areas into the main motor area that allows us to control that movement, what do we see? We see some people with autism sometimes grabbing something and then flinging it. And, we ascribe, that as, well, I don't know what that would be described at, maybe attention-seeking behavior. But if you don't have control over that movement, it presents in a lot of different ways. I mean, some kids will just sink into a couch for that, external feel. I've known other kids who've just have a hard time even getting up off the floor. Um, and so, it presents in a lot of different ways. I've had kids who are very, what I would call ballistic or forceful in their movements, and some who are very gentle. So I am going to look 1 minute. Let's see. Um, all right, forgive me. I'm just trying to get so essentially, I have just finished a book that um, goes into in detail about all of this and looks at the neurology. It explains the controversy, and we are using it as a fundraiser for Chris's camp. So anyways, I wanted to put that in. So if you had any interest, and then we'll just stop for questions. All right. Now we'll go back to my slides, and I don't know if I can paste it in here. Sorry for this. I'm just trying to, there, we'll escape for a minute. And I'm just going to paste that in there for you. So the book is called A Documentary Novel in Their Words. And yes, this is a little self-promotion, but I spent basically my entire career trying to understand this and have done, anyways, I feel like this is a book people can read to get a full grasp of the historical thing. It's actually a fictional story that has expert opinion pieces throughout. So let me go and look. I saw there was something in the chat. Okay, how can parents objectively, there's a question here in the chat. So how can parents objectively track progress when their child uses supported typing or AAC methods? Um, well, there is a lot of there's so many ways you could keep track. Um, it depends on which method you pick, and I like to say that it's not the particular method. It's probably the biggest impact for kids is to have intensity with it. So in terms of tracking progress, um, there's a sense of how many times do you get independently towards the letter you could do. So that could be a motor goal. You could take it out of the typing thing. I think a lot of people suggest, and maybe this is what you're getting to, a lot of people suggest that because that it's more of a teaching using the method to how teaching their motor system how to get to the letter board than it is uh, a test of their intelligence. And so different kids will need different things. Some kids I've seen have a lot of difficulty with their eyes. So with some of the goals or objectives could be, tracking letters with their eyes. It can be, even intentional motor movements, whatever that might be. So how can parents distinguish between behavioral challenges and motor planning difficulties in daily routines? Okay, so I guess my basic philosophy is that when you start to go for 2 weeks, I mean, it's challenging to find, but someone who really understands this. But I do free 15-minute consults. So if anybody has a question or wants to email me, that I'll be more than happy to answer it. I don't want to take up my time too much, but I feel this is really important information. So let's just break it down. If you start if you start looking at things as could it be a difficulty with inhibiting or sustaining a movement? And so the example I gave of getting up and going to the bathroom, if your brain's not connected, so when you say, oh, to be able to look at the clock, see what time it is, evaluate, that it's only 5 minutes, then and inhibit going and wait, then you're just going to get up and go. And so there's a lot of different like sensory tools you can use. So if you start treating it that way, you start seeing things differently. For example, in that instance, um, there was a private school that was started off my Chris's Camp program, and they taught their kids to use the amplified proprioception, those U loops that help you feel your body, and just to push on their legs while they were sitting. And after practicing that a fair amount of time, the kids were able to go out and watch a movie without having to get up. And so if you start looking at it as a motor disorder or motor planning difficulty or dyspraxia, and you start treating it that way, I guess I feel like with the behavioral challenges, the use of negative words isn't, can be, if these guys really understand us saying, they're being non-compliant or escaping or whatever, that intention I think can, whatever, hurt their feelings. It can impact their self-esteem. And so that's why I feel real important that it's to try and stay away from those. But if you just think of the different scenario where if you've taught the child how to give him himself his own squeezes and he can sit in the chair. Well, if you just take him to a movie theater and they don't sit in their chair, then from a behavioral perspective, that would be described as escape behavior. So the best thing I can say is that start looking at it totally as a cognitive motor is how I describe it. Apraxia, I tend to stay away from even though I think it's used mostly in autism because it's a much murkier term. And like um, people who study adult praxis call adult praxis or difficulties with adult practice apraxia and dyspraxia for kids. So did that answer your question? Okay, all right. Here, I don't know. I think hopefully you can still see this. I'm just going to put my email in here. If anybody has a question they think of later. All right, thanks everybody.